Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Death Penalty Focus webinar on how the death penalty doesn't make us safer. I'm Mary Kate DeLuco, Communications Consultant at DPF, and I'm here with my colleague, Yoko Otani-Sperlin, Associate Director of DPF. Before we start, I want to remind everyone that this will be taped and available for viewing on our website about a week from now. All registrants will receive an email with a link to the webinar when it's available. The chat will be open, but as always, we can't guarantee we'll get to all or even any of the questions, to be honest, because of time issues, but we'll do our best. Now I'd like to turn things over to our moderator, Death Penalty Focus President, Mike Farrell. Mike.
Thank you very much, Mary Kate and Yoko. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being with us today. Our guests are Rob Dunham and Chesa Boudin, two lawyers with extensive experience in criminal law whose opposition to the death penalty stems from their experience. Rob and Chesa, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And let me take the pleasure of saying that before I officially introduce you, I'm bringing two people together to whom two people I admire together in this webinar. Because of a kind of a historic set of circumstances that Rob explained, and Chesa can go on to in just a moment. But let me make the formal introduction. Rob, the title of this webinar is "The Death Penalty Doesn't Make Us Safer," but you're the death penalty in the United States. You're even more the public and police are safer in states with no death penalty.
Yeah, that's right.
You found that not only is the public less safe in these states where they're most active in carrying out executions, they are also the most dangerous for the police, and that's very surprising. Can you tell us a little more about what you found?
Yeah, we were interested in trying to figure out this whole thing about the death penalty and deterrence, because if the death penalty actually reduces murder, that's a policy reason to justify it. So we took a look at 33 years of FBI data on homicides in general and killings of police officers. And the idea was, where are the facts going to take us? What they showed us was that year after year and state after state, the public and police were safer in states that did not have the death penalty. And the most stunning of the statistics were that police were actually safest in the states that had most recently abolished the death penalty. Now, if the death penalty is a deterrent, that makes no sense at all. Why would a state that had the death penalty and hadn't abolished it yet be the safest state for police? And why afterwards would they remain among the safest states for police? And the answer to that is that the death penalty's got absolutely nothing to do with public safety. It's not a public safety policy. What it does is it affects the political environment in which debates about whether to keep or get rid of the death penalty take place. And because murders of police officers are highly emotional, and because prosecutors and police have a disproportionate influence in the legislative process, when there are significant numbers of murders of police officers, debates about getting rid of the death penalty don't go anywhere. But when the numbers of murders of police officers and murders of officers as a percentage of murders overall are very low, that becomes less of an issue. And then legislators have to deal with the actual policy. Does it work? Is it cost effective? Is it discriminatory, and so forth? And so when police murders are low, that creates a political environment in which abolition is much more likely to take place. The death penalty doesn't make anybody safer. There's no evidence that it does. And it also turns out that states that execute more people tend to be less safe as well.
Well, that's extraordinary for us to be able to have in this movement. Now, Chesa, before I introduce you or ask you in, I want Rob to tell you about something that we've just been discussing off camera, but about something that he alerted me to a few days ago. Rob, would you go ahead?
Yeah, in the early 1950s, my grandfather was chairman of the philosophy department at Temple University in Philadelphia. And he had written a best-selling book called Man Against Myth, which took a look at social myths and basically demolished them. That made him out to be a radical. And he was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee in the first attack on educational institutions. He refused to cooperate. He gave his name and address, and that was it. And he got cited for contempt of Congress, and he was fired and blacklisted for 14 years. Because he did not, quote, cure the contempt, he was actually put on trial. And he was tried before the United States Federal District Court in Washington, D.C. He was acquitted, and his lawyer, my grandfather's lawyer, was Chesa's grandfather, Lenny Boudin.
Yeah, it's a small world, and it's amazing how my grandfather's legacy continues to live on through your work in many ways, Rob, and so many of his other clients, and to make us proud as a family for his courage and his legal expertise in standing up to the excesses of government in ways that sadly feel all too relevant today.
It's just a kind of a remarkably wonderful coincidence to bring you two together. Chesa, about 6 months after you were elected DA of San Francisco, you announced that your office has not sought, and will not seek the death penalty. The result of the 2 years you were in office was that both violent and nonviolent crime fell by double digit. Will you tell us about that? Because I think that's a big deal, and I don't remember reading or hearing about it.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that, Mike. And to be really clear, I knew going into my campaign and into my inauguration that I would never seek the death penalty. And frankly, in San Francisco politics, that has long been a very safe political position. This isn't Alabama or Texas. This isn't Arizona, or Mississippi. So it is a relatively safe political position in San Francisco to oppose the death penalty. I went one step further, and I want to just add this in before I answer the heart of your question, which is that I took a look at the work that had been done by prior DAs going back decades. And it turned out there was still one person on California's death row who had been sent there by the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. And we figured out a way to get that person off of death row, effectively ending not just prospectively, but also retrospectively San Francisco's efforts to put human beings to death. So I was really proud of being able to do that. And as you said, I was thrilled to see that during my tenure, and I think it was a combination of policies and circumstances. I don't want to attribute causality to just one policy or practice, but overall, as you said, violent crime fell by nearly 20%. Property crime fell by more than 20% during my 2.5 years in office, as compared with the prior 2.5 years. This is just one real world anecdotal evidence with hard evidence of the fact that draconian punishments like the death penalty do not, in fact, make us safer. And of course, you can look around the country, as Rob's done. You can look at myriad different jurisdictions that have engaged in what researchers might call natural experiments, where they have the death penalty and then they don't, or they don't and then they do. And in fact, the entire United States sadly engaged in that kind of a natural experiment from 1972 to 1976, with the U.S. Supreme Court ban on the death penalty in 1972 being repealed in 1976. It is easy to look at the rate of occurrence of death penalty eligible offenses on either side of these policy changes. And you can tell very quickly that the death penalty absolutely does not play any kind of a meaningful deterrent in terms of the commission of those offenses. And I'll just end by saying one last thing, which is you don't need to be a PhD or a lawyer to understand this. It's simple human nature. People who commit crimes do not think about getting caught. If they think they're going to get caught, if they expect to get caught, they're not likely to commit the crime in the first place. And so what the research has found overwhelmingly is that the single best deterrent is not the severity of the punishment. That's largely irrelevant. Far more effective as a deterrent is certainty of arrest and detection. In other words, if we did a better job on the upstream end of preventing crime, of detecting crime, of ensuring that people who committed crime were arrested, and spent fewer resources trying to exact maximum punishment, such as the death penalty, from those who are caught, we would be far, far safer, and we would do far more to reduce crime even further than it has been reduced in these past several years.
Amazing. Rob, what do you think is the reason the connection between death penalty and violent crime rates isn't widely reported on? I mean, I think most people, even if they don't think it's a deterrent exactly, would still be surprised to learn that violent crime rates are even higher in states that have a death penalty than those that don't. Is this an example of what you say in your study? Facts have long been the enemy of policies that are grounded in myth and fear.
Yeah, I think that's basically right. And one of the really interesting things we we wanted to we wanted to track this myth about deterrence to see, well, maybe there's something to it in some of the most egregious murders, right? Like mass shootings. Maybe the death penalty does something for the worst of the worst, and we looked that up too. And mass murders occur disproportionately in death penalty states. And the worst mass murders occur disproportionately in death penalty states. I think what it comes down to is from a political perspective, it's easier to talk tough on crime than it is to engage in activities that actually work. And when we looked at gun safety, we looked at all the gun safety laws, looked at the Everytown for Gun Safety data, and we found that the states that have gotten rid of the death penalty ranked among the top with the strongest anti-gun, the strongest gun safety laws. And the states that talk tough and spent all their energy on punishment after the fact had the highest rates of gun violence. And that's because it's much easier politically to appear strong when you beat your chest and say we're going to punish somebody than it is to do the hard work that nobody really sees. And it's easier to report on that stuff too. I was asked by a reporter the other day about why is it that there is so much going on with executions in Florida. And it's because Ron DeSantis wants to run for president. And the higher the body count, the more press attention he gets, and it's free publicity. It's that same method of reporting the stuff that is glaring and not reporting the public policy issues, which are much harder to explain to people.
Did you find, Chesa, did you find that that was the case in San Francisco? Was the lower crime rate during your tenure not reported on? And if so, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, it was quite the opposite. I mean, our reform efforts led to a sort of a backlash in which the media focused narrowly on crimes that were occurring anecdotally and on specific areas where they could say crime was up. So, for example, even if you have an overall trend line of violent or nonviolent or all crime being down, there's always going to be certain blips, certain neighborhoods, certain time periods where you can cherry pick and say, see, crime is up. And so we saw, for example, some of the tough on crime advocacy groups send mailers, fear-mongering mailers to voters saying residential burglaries are up X%, as compared to such and such month in 2019. So, you pick one arbitrary baseline and you pick, a specific neighborhood in a specific category of crime, and you can always find some crime or some category that's gone up, and that's what people would focus on. It's just really reflective of a broader national trend that I think Rob was getting at. I mean, San Francisco has seen robberies and homicides fall by about 45% since the pre-pandemic, 2019 era. Other supposedly tough on crime cities where they're still executing people, like Oklahoma City or Memphis or Dallas Fort Worth, have seen their crime rates in those same categories go up by 45%, 49%, 30%. But if you listen to the rhetoric from the national mainstream media and certainly from the Republican Party, but much broader than just that, a lot of establishment Democratic leaders as well, there's this narrow focus on places that are implementing reforms, which ironically are all too often the places that are the safest and that have the best trend lines if you actually zoom out and look at the big picture. You asked, Mike, why I think this is. Well, I think Rob really put his finger on it. I mean, there is a real political value to playing on fear and to for news media to reporting crime that does occur. And look, we live in big cities with horrific histories of racism, deeply institutionalized racism, wealth inequality that gets worse and worse by the day, untreated mental illness, easy access to dangerous drugs. It's not a surprise that there is some level of crime. There's going to be some level of crime. And the news media can always fill 10 or 20% of its pages or its airtime with reporting on crime. And increasingly, there's videos, high definition videos. So even if overall shoplifting is down by 50%, there's just as many or more videos of people engaged in what feels like brazen shoplifting efforts. And it's those videos and that level of reporting that is far more compelling to creating a narrative in the mind of the average person than any amount of data and statistics and empirical evidence is.
Mm. And at the time when you were you wouldn't seek the death penalty, you said that your decision was consistent with the moratorium Governor Newsom had put in place in 2019. Would you have done it even if the moratorium hadn't been in place?
Absolutely. I mean, to be clear, I am opposed to the death penalty for numerous reasons. One is I think it is wrong for the state to take human life. Two is I know just how fraught the application of the death penalty is and how uncertain we have to be about the reasons why people are put to death and about their actual guilt or innocence, given the number of people that have been executed wrongfully. There's other reasons. From a fiscal standpoint, the death penalty is tremendously expensive to administer. And I'm not just talking about the actual act of taking a human life in a way that's court approved. I'm also talking about the legal appeals, the process. It takes decades of mandatory appeals. The trials themselves are slower and more costly. And so we end up spending far more of our limited public safety dollars on a single execution than we would on sending numerous people to prison, even for a life sentence. So those are just some of the many reasons why I oppose the death penalty. And one other one, which we've already talked about, but just to be clear, as part of the reasoning for me, is it doesn't make us safer. If there was some compelling evidence that it actually had a deterrent effect, that it actually reduced certain kinds of really serious violent crime, or that it actually gave victims meaningful closure in a way that other kinds of judicial process don't, then I would be more open to it. But we know that it doesn't do those things. In fact, the evidence suggests quite the opposite.
Facts that I wish our new DA in Los Angeles would understand. Rob, you looked at murder rate in states from 1987 to 2019, as
Yes.
we already discussed. You found that states that never had the death penalty tend to be by far the safest in the country. Half of the 12 longtime abolition states were among the 10 safest states in the country. 7 ranked among the 11 safest states. And you found that homicide rates did not spike following abolition, to which Chesa can attest in San Francisco after he announced his office wouldn't seek death. Was that the case in California?
Well, California is a special case because the moratorium happened just before the pandemic, and murder rates everywhere escalated after the pandemic. But in California, they didn't escalate disproportionately to anywhere else. And as Chesa was suggesting, the cities and states that had reform legislators, reform prosecutors had less of a murder rise, and the Republican red states had more of a murder rise than the blue states did. But since the drop in since the end of the pandemic, murder rates have dropped to below what they were at the time that the moratorium went into place. So the long-term evidence is that just as the case was in the states that have abolished the death penalty, the murder rate has continued to drop in states that have imposed moratoria.
Chesa, Rob's study found that law enforcement officers were disproportionately killed in the line of duty in states that had the death penalty as compared to states that didn't. What kind of reaction did you get from the San Francisco police when you stopped seeking the death penalty?
Well, I had the benefit of taking over from a predecessor, DA George Gascon, who also had not sought the death penalty. So that made it a lot easier. I know that when his predecessor, Kamala Harris, campaigned on not seeking the death penalty and then followed through on that promise, even after early in her first term, a police officer was murdered in a really horrific case. She took a lot of political blows and attacks from the police union for it, for standing her ground and not seeking the death penalty. It made it much easier for me that both of my predecessors in office had not sought the death penalty. But it is absolutely true that I was attacked relentlessly by the police for every other kind of reform we implemented. They were attacking me on social media. They were attacking me through their union. They undermined our efforts to hold police who committed crimes accountable at every turn. And in general, we see a real deeply entrenched resistance from police unions and organized police groups to anything that would reduce punishment, whether that's not seeking the death penalty on the extreme end, or whether it's sending low-level offenders to diversion instead of to jail. And this is a real obstacle to criminal justice reform. In San Francisco, even as crime rates were falling and the police budget was growing during my administration, the rate at which police solved crimes fell to record lows. They simply stopped investigating cases. They stopped doing anything other than showing up and telling victims that it was all my fault. And we have body-worn camera footage of police saying that in all manner of cases. And it was a real frustration for us. We wanted to hold people who committed crimes accountable, but we couldn't do it if the police didn't make arrests. And ultimately, in San Francisco and too many other jurisdictions, often police effectively have a veto on the kinds of criminal justice policies that local elected officials can put into place. And that's a real threat to democracy. Mike, I want to add one other point to the evidence that Rob was presenting a minute ago about the change in crime rates during the pandemic in California and other states. I agree with everything he said. I want to add one other level of nuance, kind of digging down at the county by county level data. Within California, if you look at so-called blue jurisdictions, places like San Francisco, where I was the DA, and where we were implementing a variety of policies to reduce reliance on incarceration, our crime rates either fell or the categories that rose by far less than the red jurisdictions within California during that same time period. So the exact thing Rob was describing, if you compare California as a state with, say, Oklahoma as a state, you also see, if you compare San Francisco County with, let's say, Kern County, where Bakersfield is the county seat, those Republican-controlled, tough-on-crime jurisdictions had far more severe spikes in violent crime during the pandemic than San Francisco did while we were in the midst of a decarceral reform.
I have a question for both of you, to which there may not be an answer, but I'm wondering if either of you has a theory as to why states without the death penalty are safer than those with it. Any thoughts from either of you?
Well, from a public policy perspective, it's because if you concentrate on trying to prevent crime from happening as opposed to waiting for it to happen and then punishing it after the fact, you're going to be safer. So I think that has, from a policy perspective, that's important. I also think that, with the death penalty and with homicides in general, we see them disproportionately in the states that were the former slave states. We're looking at jurisdictions and cultures that used violence as a way to enforce the social structure. And I don't think you can really quantify it, but I think that there is a significant cultural influence that affects crime rates as well.
I agree with that. I think there tends to be a lot of overlap between the states that aggressively seek the death penalty and easy access to firearms, for example. So there are a number of historic and cultural and other legal kind of trends that tend to coincide with aggressive use of the death penalty, which make violent crime more likely. And so even if you take the position that the death penalty is totally irrelevant, it doesn't make violent crime more or less likely, which may be the case, the states that tend to use the death penalty are states where there's less access to basic social services, greater racial and wealth inequality historically, less access to mental health treatment, for example. And so you end up with people who are at high risk of committing serious and violent crimes that may be eligible for the death penalty. not having any kind of early intervention or prevention mechanisms in the way that some of the more traditionally blue states do at least a slightly better job of. With gun control, for example, it's just harder to get a gun in California than it is in Oklahoma. And that it's not hard enough, in my opinion, but it's harder, and that helps us keep crime under control. I mean, I know police have a lot of different views, and you can't generalize and paint with too broad a brush. But every police officer I ever talked to was terrified of the people they interacted with on the streets having a firearm on their person or in their car when they were interacting. And so, to the extent we can get guns off the street, we actually make police officers safer. We decrease the likelihood that police will use force, that police will be victims of violence, and we reduce the number of crimes that might be candidates for the death penalty from even occurring in the first place.
Rob, what do you think is the best way for us to get the facts about the death penalty out there, to end these policies that are grounded in myth and fear and keep the death penalty alive?
Well, I think that obviously groups like Death Penalty Focus have a big role. The issue is always going to be whether we're going to be able to penetrate media coverage, you need big things to big events to cause some sort of major shift in the way the public as a whole looks at things. I'm thinking of Brian Stevenson's movie. When you can capture somebody's emotions with stories, you are able to bring about changes. I'm a data guy, and one thing I'll tell you more than anything else is that data doesn't convince people. You need to convince people with stories, and then once they see something and they feel it, then the data makes sense, and they try to use the data to persuade other people. But as a litigator, I don't think I ever won a death penalty case by persuading the judge that I was right on the law. I won the death penalty case by persuading the judge that something really bad happened to my client, and it changed the way the judge looked at the case. I think it's the same thing with the public in general. That's where groups like Witness to Innocence are so important, because we have 201 people who are innocent who are sent to death row. Some of the recent executions where we are probably executing some innocent people this month, and we clearly executed a couple of innocent people last year. Getting those stories out. It's especially challenging now with the change in the media landscape. As ownership of the media gets concentrated more and more in fewer and fewer people, and they have these essentially media conglomerates and are directing people not to cover certain things and directing people to cover events in other ways. Look at what happened with Jimmy Kimmel when he made innocent comments about the killing of Mr. Kirk. So I think there are structural issues with the way information is delivered in the United States. We have to look at alternate ways of delivering the information, but the real problem is going to be penetrating the mainstream media and getting them to change the narrative.
Good thinking. Chesa, you're at Berkeley's Criminal Law and Justice Center now, which is a policy and advocacy hub. So I know you're continuing your efforts to reform our criminal justice system. If there is anything you can think of that we and our supporters can do to support your efforts, I hope you'll let us know.
Well, thank you, Mike. Yeah, I was really pleased to be able to found and now lead the Criminal Law and Justice Center at Berkeley Law. We engage in a wide array of education, research, and advocacy work about all things criminal justice. So everything from conditions of confinement to, obviously, here we are talking about the death penalty, to diversion programs, cannabis decriminalization, AI and emerging technologies in the administration of justice. We do a really wide array of work in the criminal justice system. And I will say, to echo again Rob's point, one of the things I learned from my time in politics and elected office, and that I continue to see as a real challenge, is the ways in which politics gets in the way of good policy. We know as practitioners, and we know as scholars and researchers, um, look, there are debates and there are disagreements, but we know what makes for good policy in this space. It is not a mystery how to do much better and spend far fewer dollars and get far better outcomes in our criminal justice system. But the politics gets in the way. And as Rob said, people want to bang their chest, they want to talk tough, and it's very hard to take credit for something that doesn't happen. And so crime prevention gets de-emphasized in public policy, and punishment gets overemphasized. And that's just been a consistent trend regardless of, Democrat, Republican administration for decades. And it's taken us to a very dark place where our investment in punishment is literally bankrupting local communities and depriving them of the resources they need to be truly safe. You think about what makes for a safe and a vibrant community, things like healthcare, education, access to housing, good schools. These are things that a lot of our communities simply don't have, in part because of the rush to build jails and prisons and to militarize police departments, or to spend, countless dollars seeking and defending the application of the death penalty. So I really want to echo the need for telling individual stories to help change narratives, because that is far more persuasive to individuals than any amount of statistical evidence. The statistical evidence is important, and we need to keep publishing it and gathering it and presenting it. But we also have to tell the stories behind that data. And in terms of the work we're doing, check out our website. I'll put it in the chat if I'm able to do that here in a second. Certainly we're always open to donations. We're also eager to collaborate with folks. All of our work is done in collaboration, in coalition. We work with law firms. We work with other nonprofit organizations, other universities, community groups. And we're constantly looking for ways that we can add value to the critical criminal justice reform work happening across the country, and ways in which we can help bridge the gap between the ivory tower and the really amazing scholarship that helps inform our understanding of criminal justice policy, and then the policymakers who all too often are listening to the tweets and the viral videos rather than the scholars who know best.
Yes. Well, I'm thrilled that we've been able to bring two of you together who have this historic connection as well as this extraordinary expertise in the area currently. I'm reminded when we talked about the police officers and the police forces that some of the biggest opposition we have in the state of California is the Correctional Officers Union, which feels threatened, I suppose, by the activities of organizations like ours, that we're going to reduce imprisonment. But we're not trying to do anything other than stop killing. So I hope people can understand that. Mary Kate, do we have any questions from the chat that we might go to?
Yes, excuse me. This one isn't addressed to either of you, so you're both welcome to answer. But it seems that the media is the biggest hurdle in getting the truth out in terms of just even like Rob's. I'm ad-libbing a little bit here, but Rob's DP3 study, for instance. It seems like the statistics aren't sexy. They don't sell it for the media. What does is, as Chesa pointed out, with videos and home movie kind of things. So it isn't the media one of the biggest hurdles and really getting the truth out about the death penalty and safety?
Well, the media is the purveyor of true information and false information. In the law, there's a concept known as false light defamation, which is you tell the truth, but you tell it in a way that's so misleading that you create a false impression. The stories about all these terrible crimes that get a lot of publicity, they're true. But they are so pervasively reported compared to everything else that they present a hugely distorted view of whether society is safe or unsafe and how it's safe or unsafe. And, you know, if I'm when I'm representing somebody, when I was handling cases, um, the whole point was you had to day after day, week after week, and sometimes it took years and years, unravel this onion, where there's one thing after another that seems like it's little and insignificant, and altogether an entire case falls apart. You can't snap your fingers and show a picture the way you can when a horrible crime occurs. So it's the nature of explaining things that I think makes it hard. I would love to see, we have all these true crime series. I would love to see these false crime series, where you take one injustice after another and you prime people to think more seriously about stuff. This over the next couple of days, we're in the midst of a huge execution spree. Right. And when we look at the coverage, almost always you're going to see it's either the basketball type of analogy, play by play. Oh, there's this execution, there's that execution, and so forth. And look, executions are on the rise, and there's this surge in the death penalty, which, by the way, is nonsense. Public support for capital punishment has actually declined over the last year. And we just did a poll in Pennsylvania that showed that 2-to-1 Pennsylvanians prefer alternatives to the death penalty over the death penalty. So it's this kind of false narrative, but it's easy to say. I haven't seen the coverage that says 3 of the people who are being executed might have been innocent. That 2 of those cases were in these outlier states that allow judges to impose the death penalty when some of the jurors want life. We haven't seen that. And we've executed people who are intellectually disabled and ineligible for the death penalty. We've executed people who are mentally ill to the point that they're not competent to be executed. We've executed people who've been denied access to courts because the states provided them ineffective representation, and this United States Supreme Court has changed the law so that if you want to argue your lawyer was ineffective, you're stuck with the evidence. Once you get to federal court, you're stuck with the evidence that they failed to present in the first place in state court. We aren't seeing those stories covered. And they are hard to cover. I talk to reporters all the time. It takes about a minute and a half to discuss the circumstances of the offense. It takes about 45 minutes to explain all the legal problems that are in the case. The media is a challenge, and I think we have to figure out alternate ways of getting to the public.
Chesa, any thoughts?
I totally agree. I mean, I'll just say this isn't all, nefarious reporters and editors. I mean, this is also baked into our culture. It's, as Rob said, it's much easier to present a photo or a video with some gruesome details that are going to lead to people clicking on the story than it is to unpack all the ways in which somebody's constitutional rights were violated, or they were framed, or their conduct was a product of their really horrific childhood experiences. That stuff takes time. It takes nuance. It takes a lot of energy that not all reporters have, and frankly, not all readers have either. And I think we also need to look at ourselves in terms of what news we consume, and how we can do a better job incentivizing news outlets to do a better job. I mean, there are so many ways in which this manifests. If you're interested in looking at kind of news media anti-criminal justice reform bias, there's a really worthwhile new book by a colleague and friend, Alec Karakatsanis. The book is called Copaganda, and it's about the ways in which the media sort of buys into a police worldview for coverage of public safety issues. And it's a really deep dive, breaking down individual articles, individual cases, and kind of explaining all of the assumptions that are just baked into the way all of us, even progressives and liberals and reformers, sort of just assume the world works when it comes to public safety. So I'll give you one example that Alec uses in his book, but we talk a lot about shoplifting and retail crime and the effect it has on stores like Walgreens or Macy's. It's a big political deal. It was a big deal when I was the DA. It continues to be a big deal. They're an effective lobby. They get hundreds of millions of dollars in tax money allocated to local law enforcement simply to help protect their profits and the products on their shelves. And regardless of what you think about that as a priority for law enforcement and for tax dollars, why are we not making the point or including in the conversation that far more is lost in terms of dollar value to wage theft by employers from employees every year than is lost from stores to shoplifters every year? And yet there's this big political push to be more punitive on shoplifters, to have more resources for police to arrest them. Where is the task force looking at going after employers who are systematically stealing from their employees? Just for one example, it's not part of the framework. And so I think similarly, another example that Alec uses, which is really relevant to the conversation we're having today about more serious crimes, is that if you ask people of any political stripe in this country what their worst fear is when it comes to crime and public safety and violence, it's usually a kind of this image of some stranger we don't know lurking in an alley or invading our home and doing something horrible to us or our loved ones. But the reality is that the vast majority of violent crime is committed by people who know each other. It's not stranger danger the way that the media coverage of crime leads us to think about. And in fact, a third of stranger homicides in this country, a third, are carried out by police officers. So again, we're not talking about these issues in a way that's connected to the real world risks. And I'll give you one last analogy here. I like to surf. It's when I have time, it's my favorite pastime, favorite activity to get exercise, get into nature. And when I tell people that, I bet a lot of you are thinking, what about the sharks? And sure, there are a lot of sharks in the ocean off of San Francisco. There's a lot of great white sharks, but there's never been a shark attack on the beach along San Francisco's coast. In fact, across the planet, you are more likely to get killed by a falling coconut than you are by a shark attack. And yet people have this obsession with our fear of sharks. Nobody's worried about coconuts. We're worried about sharks. It's irrational. And we've got to find ways to do better when it comes to making public policy, especially public policy about something as serious and irreversible as state-sanctioned murder.
And I can tell you as a diver that bacteria is more dangerous to you while you're diving than a shark is.
Mary Kate, do we have any more questions?
Gosh, I can't tell you how many questions we have, and they're all so good. I'm feeling so guilty because we're not going to get to all of them. But let me just go here. I have one question that says, with Trump as the poster boy for the death penalty, we all know his zeal for executions. Does this give abolitionists an opening to build opposition? So, yeah, that's the question.
I think there are really two aspects to this because there's the short-term storm that we have to weather, and then there are the long-term implications. All the public polling indicates that the death penalty is becoming increasingly unpopular, and that's because, in large part, of distrust of government. We just asked, I mentioned the Pennsylvania poll a few minutes ago. We asked Pennsylvanians how much they trusted the government to apply the death penalty fairly and without bias and favoritism. And a majority do not trust the government. And it's 49% of Republicans, and it was 2/3 of Democrats. So it's bipartisan distrust. I think that the extreme actions that we're seeing with this administration, retaliation against the commutations that President Biden issued to people on federal death row, seeking unconstitutional mandatory death sentences, trying to seek the death penalty every time against immigrants who are accused of crime, when we know full well that the immigrant community commits crime at a far lesser rate than American citizens do. All of those things are fear-mongering. And all those things are attempting, I think, to normalize the use of state violence. And it goes hand in hand with the ongoing degradation of democratic institutions that we're seeing. If we survive the next couple of years, then I think when we look back, we will see how untrustworthy the government is with policies like this. And that will continue the 20-year trend away from capital punishment. In the 1980s, in the 1990s, 80% of Americans told Gallup that they supported the death penalty. That's down to 53%. And when you ask the policy question, what is the punishment that you think is preferable for murder? We have 60% of Americans saying that alternatives to the death penalty are preferable to capital punishment. So if we get through this period where we're seeing extreme excesses by the government and trying to make it so that it normalize unnecessary and excessive uses of force, if we get through this to the other side, I think it's going to have long-term adverse impact on the death penalty as a public policy. I think it's going to move us closer to abolition.
Chesa, any thoughts?
I'll let Rob's question handle that question, just in the interest of getting to the queue we've got in waiting here.
Okay. This question is whether the Gavin Newsom's action of closing death row, mainlining death sentence prisoners in the prison population, how has that affected, do you think, the public perception? Did it stop demonizing this group and make them more human, or any effect that either of you can see on closing death row in California?
Look, I mean, I'll just say we haven't gone far enough. I mean, we need to actually once and for all end the state's role in tinkering with the taking of human life, and putting a moratorium on the actual executions is good. Getting people off of death row and housed with appropriate classification housing within the broader prison system is a step in the right direction. But none of that really deals with the fundamental problem that the death penalty is still on the books in California. We've got governors and attorney generals who, for decades, have said they oppose those things and are not yet willing to actually stop defending it. I mean, the attorney general's office for decades, even Kamala Harris, Javier Becerra, now Attorney General Rob Bonta, their office continues to defend death sentences imposed by the counties. And so I think it's a step in the right direction, but we actually have people who know that it's the right thing to do and who politically in their heart of hearts support ending the death penalty. And they need to be willing to take the political steps of actually abolishing it in this state so that we can be the leader we hold ourselves out to be for the rest of the country.
I would add to that if Governor Newsom wants to distinguish himself from other politicians, this is an area in which he can clearly do it. California has the largest death row in the United States. The largest death row, if we divide the states individually, it'd be the largest death row in the Western Hemisphere. He's made important steps in bringing about reforms, and he has in his power the possibility to grant clemency. Now, he needs support from the California Supreme Court on a fair number of those, but that would be a bold step that would clearly set him apart and provide a kind of moral leadership that I think would provide momentum for anti-death penalty efforts in the rest of the country.
And frankly, given the polling numbers, it would provide momentum for Governor Newsom's bid to be the next president of the United States. So it'd be a wildly popular step and a great way to distinguish himself from President Trump and other national leaders who are doing so much damage to the country on myriad fronts.
I quite agree. And I've personally had some conversations with him about this subject and about commuting death row entirely and doing what he can to do away with it. And I'm frankly, personally very hopeful that will be the case. I just, before you jump in with the question, Mary Kate, I just had an experience I want to run by both of you. There's a new organization called College Unbound started by a friend of mine. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it is a group of men and women from death row. We had here at the house just a week or two ago. And two of them, one of them tells a great story, and it's so wonderful about having spent 20 some years on death row for a crime you didn't commit. And it's the kind of thing that really gets to people's understanding. But the other was guilty. He said, I committed the crime. I deeply, forever sorry for death row, and was finally released. And I think somewhere in there is a great lesson for people to understand that one can commit a terrible crime and reform oneself and become a citizen that is worthy of your respect. And it was something that moved me tremendously.
Well, I appreciate you raising that, Mike. You know, College Unbound is a phenomenal program. The president, Adam Bush, is a friend, and I'm a big admirer of his and the work that College Unbound does. I know they're based in Providence, Rhode Island, but they do work way beyond there. And I think the point you made, Mike, is really important to remember. You know, yes, some people who are on death row are innocent, and some are guilty. And while those distinctions matter, and the fact that people who are innocent are being put to death is an extremely compelling reason why we should abolish the death penalty, we should also abolish it for the people who are guilty, even guilty of heinous crimes. And some of them, to be sure, have committed really, really horrific, violent acts. But as Bob's work as a trial lawyer shows, and as we all know from our own personal lived experiences, none of us is defined by or should be defined by our worst mistake. All of us grow and change and have the capacity for redemption. That's a story as old as humanity. It's written into every major religious text of every culture. Forgiveness, redemption, growth. I think back on the person that I was 10 or 15 years ago, and some of the mistakes I made in life and in love and in law. And those aren't mistakes that I would make today. And certainly with the right supports and the right opportunities, so many of the people who are languishing in cages and on death rows across this country have the ability not only to live a fulfilling, meaningful life, but to contribute, to pay taxes, to support their families, to hold jobs that actually benefit their communities. And rather than seeking to snuff out life, we would all lift ourselves up collectively by finding ways through government policy and investment and social welfare initiatives to actually lift up everybody's ability to reach their full human potential.
Mary Kate, I'm sorry, is there another question? Since we have a minute or two.
Yeah. In a media landscape where coverage of the death penalty can be factually accurate, yet framed to support a particular narrative, how can advocates stay hopeful and motivated to pursue justice, especially when public perception is shaped by such distortions?
I think we just hammer away. You know, you do what you can do. You know, I've said some things that are critical of the media, and you know, and I've worked with some very, very good reporters, and what I can say is that they, for the most part, they want to tell the truth, and they want to. They also want to tell a good story. The challenge, I think, for us individually, is to figure out who we need to tell our messages to, figure out who the reporters we trust are, figure out what alternate ways of reaching each other are, especially as newspapers continue to have significant troubles and the networks are going to be less and less powerful over time. We need to create our own alternate media structures. But we also need to make sure that we're telling our stories to people who matter. And that means that individuals need to be involved in local politics. The biggest, the easiest, and most effective way to reduce the death penalty in the United States is to elect Chesa Boudin district attorney, right? I mean, one of the studies we did, we looked at how many death sentences were imposed in a county in a given year, and then we ranked them. And so we had 34 worst years in death sentencing in the United States, and 31 of those 34 came from just 4 counties. You elect reform prosecutors there, the bulk of the death penalty of people coming onto death row disappears. So I think that we really need to concentrate on local politics, making sure that good people run for office, making sure that we know who the judges are that we're voting for, and making sure that people who are in office understand that if they have the moral courage to oppose the death penalty, it's not going to hurt them at the polls. All the new polling that we've done show that people are not going to hold someone's opposition to the death penalty against them if they agree with that candidate on most other issues. So we need to be reinforcing that message. We need to be telling our legislators that we support them. We will support them if they will oppose the death penalty. And we need to light a fire so that we get people who want to bring about legitimate reform interested in running for office. We get them elected, and we oppose the efforts by outside groups to recall them or challenge them with people who want to adopt regressive policies.
We are, I think we're about out of time, Mary Kate, am I right?
Yeah, I'm afraid we are, Mike, as usual.
Well, let me just say, this has been a really wonderful hour in my life. You two are truly inspiring. The work you do and the work you have done in the past and the work you will continue to do moves us all, and those of us associated with Death Penalty Focus, and I think those out there listening to you, to find ways to work for a better world, a better country, and to realize the value in human life and the ways in which we can and should love one another. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, likewise.
Thank you
Appreciate the
so
work.
much, both of you. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you all.